The champagne tasted like regret, and my wife's smile looked sharp enough to cut glass. I should have known something was coming when Tessa insisted I wear the good suit to the Children's Hope Foundation gala, the one that made me look like I was playing dress-up in my father's clothes. "Stop slouching, Dan," she hissed through her perfect teeth, waving at some donor across the ballroom. "These people write checks with more zeros than your annual salary." I straightened up, adjusting my tie that felt more like a noose. Dan Proctor, insurance fraud investigator, reduced to arm candy at another dog and pony show for rich people who wanted to write off their guilt. The irony wasn't lost on me. I spent my days catching people who lied about money, and here I was, surrounded by folks who lied about caring. The Fairmont Chicago's Grand Ballroom sparkled with enough crystal to blind a small aircraft. Women in dresses that cost more than my car payment glided past tables laden with food nobody would eat, while men in $1,000 suits discussed tax shelters between courses. The live band played something smooth and forgettable, the kind of music designed to fade into the background of important conversations about other people's money. "There's Mrs. Rothstein," Tessa whispered, her grip on my arm tightening. "She donated $50,000 last year. Smile and nod when I introduce you." I plastered on what I hoped passed for enthusiasm. After 8 years of marriage, I'd perfected the art of looking interested in Tessa's charity world while mentally calculating insurance fraud patterns. It was a survival skill. That's when I saw her. Vivian Harper stood near the bar, and every man in a 30-foot radius had suddenly developed an urgent need for alcohol. Tessa's younger sister had always been stunning, but tonight she looked like she'd stepped off a movie screen. The black dress she wore should have been illegal in 12 states, and her dark hair cascaded over bare shoulders in a way that made my mouth go dry. Our eyes met across the room, and she gave me a look I couldn't quite read. Like she knew something I didn't, which, knowing Viv, was entirely possible. The woman had a law degree and worked as a paralegal at one of Chicago's top firms. She was sharp as a scalpel and twice as dangerous. "Is that your sister?" I asked Tessa, nodding toward the bar. Tessa's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I didn't know she was coming." "Interesting. In my line of work, you learn to read people's tells." Tessa's left eye twitched when she lied. A tiny muscle spasm most people missed. It was twitching now. "Maybe we should say hello," I suggested. "Later," Tessa said quickly. "I need to work the room first. That's Greg Sandlin by the auction table. He's the foundation director I've been working with." I followed her gaze to a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a cologne advertisement, silver at the temples, expensive watch, the kind of confident smile that probably worked on desperate housewives and charity board members. He caught Tessa's eye and raised his glass in what seemed like a private toast. Another tell. When Tessa was attracted to someone, she touched her necklace. Her fingers were on her pearls now, and she wasn't even looking at me. "How long have you been working with Greg?" I asked casually. "A few months. He's very dedicated to the cause." I'll bet he was. In my experience, guys like Greg Sandlin were dedicated to whatever got them laid or paid, preferably both. But I kept that observation to myself. Tessa hated it when I profiled her friends, as she called my professional habit of reading people. The evening dragged on with the usual charity gala routine, overpriced wine, underwhelming speeches, and enough fake enthusiasm to power a small city. I made small talk with donors about tax write-offs while Tessa fluttered around the room like a social butterfly with a business degree. Around 9 o'clock, things got interesting. The band finished their set, and someone handed Tessa a microphone. She stepped onto the small stage, her cheeks flushed from wine and whatever game she'd been playing all evening. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "Thank you all for supporting Children's Hope tonight. Your generosity will change lives." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. I clapped along, wondering where this was going. Tessa loved being the center of attention, but she usually stuck to the script at these events. Before we conclude tonight's festivities, she continued, I have a personal announcement to make. My blood went cold. In 8 years of marriage, Tessa's personal announcements had included her decision to quit her job, her need for a new car, and her desire to redecorate our entire house. None of them had been good news for my bank account. She found me in the crowd, her eyes locking onto mine with laser precision. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about honesty and authenticity, she said, her voice steady and clear. About being true to yourself and not living a lie. The room had gone quiet. Even the waitstaff stopped moving. So I want everyone here to know, from now on I'm single. Go find someone, Dan. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt 300 pairs of eyes turn toward me, waiting for my reaction. My brain struggled to process what had just happened. Had my wife just announced our divorce at a charity gala? In front of Chicago's social elite? I managed a weak laugh and raised my glass. Do I at least get the car? A few people chuckled nervously, but the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Tessa stood on the stage, looking pleased with herself, like she'd just delivered the punchline to the world's cruelest joke. That's when Vivian appeared beside me. She moved through the crowd with the grace of a predator, her heels clicking against the marble floor. When she reached me, she slipped her arm through mine with practiced ease. Awesome, she said, her voice carrying clearly in the stunned silence. Then I'm taking him. The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, and the sound of cell phones being pulled out for photos filled the air. I looked up at Tessa on the stage and watched her face cycle through confusion, shock, and pure panic. That's not what I meant, Tessa stammered into the microphone, her composure cracking like cheap paint. But Viv wasn't done. She stood on her tiptoes and whispered in my ear, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. Play along. Trust me, you're about to need it. The next few minutes passed in a blur of shocked faces and urgent whispers. Tessa stumbled off the stage, her cheeks burning red as she pushed through the crowd toward us. Greg Sandlin appeared at her side like a well-dressed guardian angel, his hand on her lower back in a gesture that was definitely not professional. Vivian, what are you doing? Tessa hissed when she reached us. Supporting my new boyfriend, Viv replied smoothly. You did just announce you were single, didn't you? In front of 300 witnesses? I found my voice. Maybe we should take this somewhere private. Excellent idea, Viv agreed. She nodded toward a side door marked Staff Only. The coat check room should be empty. We made our way through the crowd, leaving behind a wake of whispered conversations and pointing fingers. I caught fragments as we passed. Did you see that? The sister took him right there. Poor Tessa. How embarrassing. The coat check room was small and dimly lit, filled with the smell of expensive perfume and mothballs. As soon as the door closed behind us, Tessa whirled on her sister. Are you insane? What was that performance about? Viv leaned against a rack of fur coats, her expression calm as a lake before a storm. I could ask you the same thing. Announcing your divorce at a charity gala? Very classy, Tess. I was making a point about authenticity. You were making a fool of yourself, Viv interrupted. And Dan, but mostly yourself. I looked between the two sisters, feeling like I was watching a tennis match where I didn't know the rules. Can someone please explain what's happening here? Viv reached into her small purse and pulled out her phone. I found out about the affair 3 weeks ago, Dan. I've been waiting for the right moment to tell you. The world tilted sideways. What affair? Show him, Tessa said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Viv's fingers moved across her phone screen with practiced efficiency. Tessa's been sleeping with Greg Sandlin for 4 months. I know because I helped her set up cloud backup on her phone last Christmas, and she never changed the sharing settings. She turned the phone toward me. The screen showed a text conversation between Tessa and Greg, complete with timestamps and photos that made my stomach turn. Jesus Christ, Tessa, I breathed. It's not what it looks like, she said weakly. It looks like you're naked in his office, I replied, scrolling through messages that detailed their affair in explicit detail. On his desk, during work hours. Viv took the phone back. That's not even the interesting part. Show him the financial records, Dan. I don't have… Yes, you do. Viv pulled a manila folder from behind the coats where she'd apparently hidden it earlier. I'm a paralegal, remember? I know how to gather evidence. She handed me the folder. Inside were printed bank statements, charity financial reports, and what looked like vendor invoices. My insurance investigator brain kicked into gear automatically, scanning for patterns and anomalies. Holy shit, I whispered. Language, Dan, Tessa said automatically. Holy shit, I repeated, louder this time. Tessa, these vendor payments, half of these companies don't exist. Viv nodded grimly. Greg's been creating phantom vendors and splitting the money with whoever authorizes the payments. Guess who's been signing off on vendor approvals for the past 4 months? I looked at my wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, and saw guilt written across her face like a neon sign. How much? 200,000 so far, Viv said. Small amounts, spread out over time. Very professional. I needed the money, Tessa said defensively. Do you know what it costs to maintain appearances in this social circle? The clothes, the jewelry, the spa treatments. The hotel rooms, I added, looking at the credit card statements. Jesus, Tessa, the Ritz-Carlton? Twice a week? Greg has very specific tastes, she said, then immediately looked like she wanted to take the words back. I closed the folder and looked at Viv. Why are you showing me this? Because you're a good man who deserves better, she said simply. And because I've been in love with you since the day Tessa brought you home 8 years ago. The confession hit me like a physical blow. I stared at her, this woman I'd known for nearly a decade, and realized I was seeing her clearly for the first time. Viv? Don't say anything yet, she interrupted. We have bigger problems. Greg's about to run. She was right. Through the small window in the coat check room, I could see Greg Sandlin making his way toward the exit, his face pale and sweaty. He kept looking over his shoulder like a man being chased by ghosts. He knows we're onto him, I said. Viv smiled, and for the first time all evening, it wasn't entirely pleasant. Good. Let's make sure he doesn't get far. We burst out of the coat check room like a SWAT team with evening wear. Greg was halfway to the exit, moving fast but trying not to look like he was fleeing. Too bad for him. I'd been chasing insurance fraudsters for 15 years, and they all had the same guilty body language. Mr. Sandlin? Viv called out in her sweetest voice. Could we have a word? He froze like a deer in headlights, then slowly turned around. His cologne advertisement smile was nowhere to be seen. I was just leaving, he said. Early morning tomorrow. I'll bet, I said, stepping up beside Viv. Running a charity must keep you busy. All those vendor payments to process. The color drained from his face. I don't know what you're talking about. Viv pulled out the manila folder and slammed it down on the coat check counter hard enough to make the attendant jump. Meridian Consulting Services. Ring a bell, Greg? Because according to the Illinois Secretary of State, that company doesn't exist. Neither does Lakefront Administrative Solutions or Premier Event Planning. A small crowd had started to gather. Nothing drew attention at a charity gala like the smell of scandal. You're making a mistake, Greg said, but his voice cracked on the last word. The only mistake, I said, was using the same routing number for 3 different fake companies. That's amateur hour, Greg. I've seen better fraud attempts from teenagers trying to fake their car insurance. Mrs. Rothstein, the $50,000 donor, pushed through the crowd. What's this about fraud? Nothing, Greg said quickly. Just a misunderstanding. A $200,000 misunderstanding, Viv interrupted. She opened the folder and pulled out a spreadsheet. Would you like to see where your donation really went, Mrs. Rothstein? The crowd pressed closer. I recognized several board members from the foundation, their faces shifting from curiosity to alarm as they realized what they were hearing. "This is ridiculous," Tessa said, finally finding her voice. Greg would never what?" Viv asked. "Steal money from children's charity? Sleep with married women? Create fake companies to launder donations?" She pulled out her phone and started reading from the screen. March 15th, 11:47 p.m. Just approved another payment to Meridian, $25K this time. When do I get my cut? That's you, Tessa. March 16th, 6:32 a.m. Your cut is waiting for you at the Ritz, room 412. That's Greg. The crowd gasped collectively. Someone in the back shouted, "Call the police!" Greg made his move then, pushing through the crowd toward the exit, but he hadn't counted on Viv's paralegal training. She stepped smoothly into his path, her small clutch purse somehow transformed into an immovable barrier. "Going somewhere?" she asked sweetly. "Get out of my way," he snarled, dropping the polished facade entirely. "I don't think so." She nodded to someone behind me. "Marcus, now would be good." I turned to see a young man in a waiter's uniform wheeling over an AV cart. He plugged something into the ballroom's projection system, and suddenly the charity's logo disappeared from the screens around the room. In its place were Greg and Tessa's text messages, blown up to 20-foot-high clarity for everyone to see. The crowd erupted. Gasps turned to shouts. Phones came out, and I heard at least 3 people calling their lawyers. Mrs. Rothstein looked like she was about to faint. "Turn that off!" Tessa screamed, but Marcus, whoever he was, ignored her completely. The messages kept scrolling. Details about their affair, plans for spending the stolen money, and worst of all, jokes about the stupid donors who were funding their lifestyle. Greg's carefully cultivated image crumbled in real time as 300 of Chicago's elite watched him get exposed as a thief and a fraud. "This is illegal!" Greg shouted. "You can't just—" "Actually," Viv said calmly, "we can. The messages were obtained legally through cloud backup sharing, and the financial records are public information for a nonprofit organization. I checked with 3 different attorneys this week." Board President Mrs. Romer pushed through the crowd, her face like thunder. "Mr. Sandlin, you're suspended immediately. Security will escort you from the premises. And Mrs. Proctor," she added, turning to Tessa, "your volunteer position is terminated effective immediately. We'll be conducting a full audit of every transaction you've approved." 2 security guards appeared as if by magic, flanking Greg and Tessa like bookends. The crowd parted to let them through, and I heard the distinctive sound of camera phones capturing every moment. "This isn't over," Greg said, as the guards took his arms. I stepped forward, close enough to smell his expensive cologne and cheap desperation. "Yeah, it is. And Greg, next time you want to commit fraud, maybe don't do it with an insurance investigator's wife. We're professionally paranoid about this stuff." The guards led them toward the exit, past tables full of donors who were already pulling out their phones to call their accountants. The Children's Hope Foundation was about to become very unhopeful indeed. Viv slipped her arm through mine again, and this time it felt natural. Right, even. "So," she said, watching her sister disappear through the ballroom doors, "want to get out of here? I know a place that serves decent coffee and doesn't require evening wear." I looked around the ballroom, at the shocked faces and whispered conversations, at the screens still displaying evidence of my wife's betrayal. Then I looked at Viv, beautiful and brilliant, and apparently in love with me. "Best offer I've had all night," I said. As we walked toward the exit, I heard Mrs. Rothstein behind us. Well, that was certainly more entertaining than the usual charity auction. The coffee shop Viv chose was a 24-hour diner on the south side that looked like it hadn't been updated since the Carter administration. Red vinyl booths, fluorescent lighting, and coffee that could strip paint. After the crystal and champagne of the gala, it felt like returning to reality. So, I said, sliding into the booth across from her, want to explain how you orchestrated that entire performance? Viv stirred sugar into her coffee and smiled. I'm a paralegal, Dan. We're professional orchestrators. When I found those messages 3 weeks ago, I knew I had to do something. But I also knew you'd never believe me if I just told you Tessa was cheating. You could have tried. Could I? You've been defending her for years. Every time someone pointed out her flaws, you made excuses. You're loyal to a fault. She was right, and we both knew it. I'd spent 8 years overlooking Tessa's selfishness, her materialism, her need to be the center of attention. I'd told myself it was love, but maybe it was just habit. The financial fraud was a bonus, Viv continued. I was looking for evidence of the affair when I stumbled across the vendor payments. That's when I knew we had them both. Marcus the waiter? IT consultant. I hired him to handle the technical side. The AV setup, the cloud backup access, making sure everything was legal and admissible. I shook my head in amazement. You planned this whole thing. I planned to expose them, yes. I didn't plan for Tessa to announce your divorce in front of 300 people. That was a gift. Some gift. I took a sip of coffee and immediately regretted it. Jesus, this stuff is terrible. But honest, Viv said. No pretense, no artificial flavoring, just coffee that tastes like coffee. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching late-night Chicago through the diner's grimy windows. Cabs and delivery trucks, people heading home from second jobs, the real world that existed outside charity galas and social climbing. What happens now? I asked. Now? The Foundation's board will vote to press charges. The FBI will investigate the financial fraud. Tessa and Greg will probably plea bargain down to something manageable if they cooperate. I meant with us. Viv met my eyes across the table. That's up to you. I meant what I said back there, Dan. I've been in love with you for 8 years. But I won't be anyone's rebound. You're not a rebound, I said. You're complicated. How so? You're my soon-to-be ex-wife's sister. You just destroyed my marriage in front of half of Chicago, and you're the smartest, most beautiful woman I've ever met. 2 out of 3 isn't bad, she said with a smile. Which 2? I'll let you figure that out. My phone buzzed with a text message, then another, then a flood of them as news of the evening's events spread through social media. I glanced at the screen and saw messages from friends, co-workers, and people I hadn't heard from in years. You're famous, Viv observed. Infamous, more like. Man whose wife left him for charity fraud. Could be worse. Could be man who stayed married to charity fraud. She had a point. I thought about the text messages Marcus had displayed, the casual cruelty in Tessa's words about the donors, the way she'd laughed about stealing money meant for children. How long had she been like that? Had I just not wanted to see it? I need to call my lawyer, I said. Already handled. I took the liberty of scheduling you an appointment with Jennifer Walsh tomorrow at 10. She's the best divorce attorney in the city. You think of everything. I try to. It's what makes me good at my job. And apparently good at revenge. Viv's smile turned sharp. Oh, Dan, we're just getting started. The next morning brought a hangover I didn't deserve and a phone that wouldn't stop ringing. News of the charity gala disaster had spread faster than a Chicago fire, and apparently everyone in the city wanted to talk to the man whose wife had publicly dumped him before getting arrested for fraud. Well, not arrested yet. But the FBI had opened an investigation, and Tessa was probably waking up in a lawyer's office somewhere, trying to figure out how to spin $200,000 in theft as a misunderstanding. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when someone knocked on my apartment door. Through the peephole, I saw my partner Pete Kowalski holding a box of donuts and grinning like an idiot. You're famous, Danny boy, he announced as I let him in. Front page of the Tribune's website. Charity gala turns into fraud bust. Wonderful, I muttered. Pete dropped the donuts on my kitchen counter and pulled out his phone. Listen to this quote. The evening took an unexpected turn when Foundation volunteer Tessa Proctor announced her divorce before being exposed in an elaborate fraud scheme orchestrated by her sister-in-law, paralegal Vivian Harper. Sister-in-law? Soon-to-be ex-sister-in-law, Pete corrected. But the reporter probably figured that was too complicated. Oh, and there's video. He showed me his phone screen. Someone had recorded the entire confrontation, from Tessa's announcement to Greg's perp walk out of the ballroom. The video had already been viewed 50,000 times. I look terrible, I said, watching myself stand there in shock while my life imploded in real time. You look like a guy who just found out his wife's a cheating thief, Pete replied. Which, to be fair, you were. My phone rang. The caller ID showed my boss, Captain Goodman. Proctor, I answered. Dan, you okay? Goodman's gruff voice carried genuine concern. Saw the news this morning. I'm fine, Cap. Embarrassed, but fine. Nothing to be embarrassed about. You got played by a professional. Happens to the best of us. Thanks. That said, I need you to recuse yourself from any cases involving the Children's Hope Foundation. Conflict of interest. Understood. And Dan? That paralegal sister of yours, Harper? She did good work last night. Clean evidence gathering, proper documentation. Tell her if she ever wants to switch careers, we could use someone like that. After he hung up, I looked at Pete. Viv's getting job offers. Smart woman. You gonna marry her? Pete, my divorce isn't even filed yet. So, life's short. Besides, she already proved she's got your back. How many women would go to that much trouble to save you from a cheating wife? He had a point. But before I could answer, someone else knocked on my door. This time it was Tessa. She looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed, her makeup smeared, and she was wearing the same dress from last night. Behind her stood a man in an expensive suit who screamed, "Criminal defense attorney." "We need to talk," she said. "No, we don't," I replied, starting to close the door. "Dan, please. I can explain everything." "You stole money from a children's charity, Tessa. What's to explain?" The lawyer stepped forward. "Mr. Proctor, my client is prepared to make a full confession in exchange for your cooperation in the divorce proceedings." "What kind of cooperation?" "No alimony claims, no division of assets, clean break, no contest." I looked at Tessa, really looked at her. The woman I'd married 8 years ago was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Someone who would steal from children and cheat with her accomplice, and then try to negotiate her way out of consequences. "Deal," I said. "But I want it in writing, today." "Done," the lawyer said quickly. After they left, Pete whistled low. That was easy. Too easy. She's scared. Of what? Prison? Of Viv. Tessa knows her sister and she knows this isn't over. Pete grinned. "I like this Vivian already." He was right to like her. Over the next week, Viv orchestrated a campaign of legal and social destruction that was beautiful to watch. She leaked the charity fraud story to 3 different newspapers, each with exclusive details that kept the scandal in the headlines. She provided evidence to the FBI that resulted in federal charges against both Tessa and Greg. And somehow, she managed to get the Chicago Bar Association to investigate Greg's law license, even though he wasn't technically a lawyer. "How did you pull that off?" I asked her over dinner at a restaurant that didn't require evening wear. "He's been representing himself as legal counsel to several nonprofits," she explained. "Turns out that's illegal if you're not actually admitted to the bar." "Is he?" "Nope, never even went to law school. Just had business cards made and started calling himself Director of Legal Affairs." I shook my head in amazement. "You're terrifying." "I prefer thorough." The restaurant was a small Italian place in Little Italy, the kind of neighborhood joint where the owner's mother still made the sauce, and the waiters had been there since the Reagan administration. After a week of media attention and legal meetings, it felt good to sit somewhere quiet and normal. "Any word from Tessa?" Viv asked. Her lawyer called this morning. She wants to settle the divorce as quickly as possible. Smart. The federal prosecutor is offering plea deals, but only if they cooperate fully. The longer she waits, the worse her position gets. What about Greg? Greg's an idiot. He's trying to fight the charges, claims he was seduced into the fraud scheme by a manipulative woman. I nearly choked on my wine. He's blaming Tessa? Completely. Says she initiated the affair and the fraud. His lawyer is building a defense around diminished capacity due to sexual manipulation. Will that work? Not when the prosecutor has text messages of him bragging about hooking another desperate housewife and bleeding these charity idiots dry. Turns out, Tessa wasn't his first victim. The waiter brought our entrees, real Italian food made by people who cared about more than profit margins. As we ate, I found myself studying Viv across the table. She was beautiful, obviously, but there was something else. An intelligence and competence that I'd never fully appreciated when she was just Tessa's sister. Can I ask you something? I said. Shoot. Why me? I mean, you could have any man in Chicago. Why waste 8 years pining after your sister's husband? Viv set down her fork and considered the question seriously. Remember the first time we met? Tessa brought you to our parents' house for Sunday dinner. Yeah, you were in law school. I was studying for the bar exam, actually, stressed out of my mind, convinced I was going to fail. You spent 2 hours helping me practice oral arguments, even though you'd never been to law school yourself. I remembered that day. Viv had been so nervous, so different from her usual composed self. I'd tried to help her relax by playing devil's advocate on her practice questions. You treated me like I was smart, she continued. Not like Tessa's little sister or a future lawyer or any other label, just like I was worth listening to. Do you know how rare that is? Viv, I'm not done. Over the next 8 years, you were the only person who remembered my birthday without Facebook reminding you. You asked about my cases, my career, my opinions on things that mattered. Tessa treated you like an accessory, but you treated me like a person. You are a person, an amazing person. I know, but most men don't see that. They see the dress, the legs, the package. You saw me. We finished dinner in comfortable silence, and I walked her to her car in the restaurant's parking lot. The October air was crisp, carrying the smell of fallen leaves and the promise of winter. So, what happens now? I asked. Now we wait for the legal system to work. Tessa and Greg will probably get 18 months minimum, assuming they take the plea deal. The foundation will recover most of the stolen money through asset forfeiture, and you'll be free to start over. With you? She stepped closer, close enough that I could smell her perfume and see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. If you want, she said. But I'm not going to be your transition woman, Dan. If we do this, it's because you want me, not because you're rebounding from Tessa. I want you, I said, and realized I meant it completely. I've probably wanted you for years. I was just too married and too stupid to admit it. She smiled and stood on her tiptoes to kiss me. It was soft and sweet and tasted like wine and new possibilities. Good, she whispered against my lips, because I'm not done with my revenge yet. What else could you possibly do to them? Her smile turned wicked. Oh, Dan, you're about to find out. The next phase of Viv's campaign began 3 days later at the country club, where Tessa had spent the last 5 years trying to climb the social ladder. The Lakeside Country Club was old money Chicago, the kind of place where membership was inherited, and the golf course was older than most of the city's skyscrapers. Tessa had worked for years to get accepted there, networking at charity events and sucking up to the membership committee. She'd finally been approved just 6 months ago, right around the time her affair with Greg had started. How did you get us in here? I asked Viv as we walked through the club's marble lobby. I'm dating a member, she said casually. Since when? Since yesterday. His name is Robert Goodman, and he's very interested in my paralegal skills. It took me a second to place the name. My boss? You're dating my boss? Technically, I'm consulting for his private security firm. The dating is just a bonus. Captain Goodman appeared from the bar, looking uncomfortable in golf attire, but carrying himself with the same authority he had at the precinct. Dan, good to see you outside the office. Cap, I didn't know you were a member here. Inherited it from my father. Haven't used it in years until Vivian suggested we meet here for lunch. Viv slipped her arm through Goodman's with practiced ease. Robert's been very helpful with my research into nonprofit fraud patterns. Turns out the Children's Hope Foundation wasn't Greg's first target. She led us to a table on the terrace overlooking the golf course. The October sun was warm despite the cool air, and the view was spectacular. I could see why Tessa had wanted to belong here. 3 other charities in the past 2 years, Goodman continued, pulling out a file folder. Same pattern. Phantom vendors, small amounts spread over time, always with an inside accomplice. Always women? I asked. Always married women with access to authorization systems, Viv corrected. Greg has a type, bored housewives looking for excitement and extra income. How did you find this out? I asked the right questions to the right people, she said. Amazing what you can learn when you know how to research legal databases. A commotion near the clubhouse caught our attention. Tessa was walking across the terrace with 2 other women I recognized from various charity events, Megan Walsh and Louise Pemberton, part of Tessa's social circle. Perfect timing, Viv murmured. Tessa spotted us and froze. For a moment I thought she might turn around and leave, but then her chin went up in that stubborn way I remembered, and she marched over to our table. Dan, she said stiffly, I didn't expect to see you here. Vivian's treating me to lunch, I replied. You remember Captain Goodman from the police department? Goodman stood and extended his hand with professional courtesy. Mrs. Proctor, how are you holding up? Fine, thank you, she said, though she looked anything but fine. Her usual perfect appearance was slightly off, makeup a little too heavy, smile a little too bright. Megan and Louise hung back, clearly uncomfortable, but unwilling to miss whatever drama was about to unfold. I suppose you're here to gloat, Tessa said to Viv. Actually, I'm here to have lunch with my boyfriend, Viv replied sweetly. But since you're here, there's something you should know. She opened her own folder and pulled out several photographs. Remember Sandra Martinez from the Literacy Foundation? And Jennifer Kim from Arts for Children? They want to meet you. Tessa's face went white. I don't know what you're talking about. They're Greg's other victims. Turns out he's been running this scam for years. Sandra lost her marriage and her job. Jennifer's facing federal charges just like you. That's impossible. They're testifying for the prosecution, Viv continued relentlessly, about Greg's methods, his pattern of targeting married women, his promises of easy money and romantic adventure. Megan stepped forward, her eyes bright with curiosity. Tessa, what is she talking about? Nothing, Tessa said quickly. It's a misunderstanding. It's a federal fraud case, Goodman said quietly. Mrs. Proctor and her accomplice are facing significant prison time. The color drained completely from Tessa's face. Louise gasped audibly, and Megan pulled out her phone like she was documenting a car accident. You're enjoying this, Tessa accused Viv. Immensely, Viv admitted. You stole money from children, Tessa. You cheated on a good man with a professional con artist. And you did it all while acting like you were better than everyone else. I needed the money. For what? Designer handbags? Spa treatments? Hotel rooms with your boyfriend? The conversation was attracting attention from other diners. I could see heads turning, people pulling out phones to record. Tessa's humiliation was becoming a public spectacle. Viv, I said quietly, maybe we should... No, she said firmly. Tessa needs to understand something. Actions have consequences. You can't just apologize your way out of federal charges. She stood up, and walked around the table until she was face to face with her sister. You had everything, Tessa. A husband who loved you, a comfortable life, respect in the community, and you threw it all away for what? A few $1,000s and some mediocre sex with a con man? You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You're selfish and greedy, and you always have been. The only difference is now everyone else knows it too. Tessa looked around the terrace, at the staring faces and recording phones, and finally seemed to grasp the full scope of her situation. Her perfect social world was crumbling in real time, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "Come on," she said to Megan and Louise. "We're leaving." But her friends didn't move. Megan was still recording, and Louise looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. "Actually," Louise said carefully, "I think I'll stay for lunch. The salmon here is supposed to be excellent." Tessa stared at her in shock. "Louise, I'm sorry, Tessa, but I can't be seen with you right now. My husband's on the foundation board at Children's Hope. This is complicated." One by one, Tessa's social circle abandoned her. Megan mumbled an excuse about a hair appointment and hurried away. Other acquaintances who had been approaching our table suddenly found urgent reasons to be elsewhere. Within minutes, Tessa stood alone on the terrace, surrounded by strangers who knew her story and former friends who no longer wanted to be associated with her name. "This isn't over," she said to Viv. "Yes, it is," Viv replied calmly. "You just don't know it yet." Tessa turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the terrace stones like a countdown timer. I watched her go and felt something I hadn't expected: pity. "That was brutal," I said to Viv. "It was necessary," she corrected. Tessa needed to understand that her actions affected more than just you and her. She destroyed trust in a charity that helps children. She needs to face the full consequences of that. Goodman nodded approvingly. "Your girlfriend is thorough, Dan. Remind me never to get on her bad side." "Noted," I said, looking at Viv with a mixture of admiration and healthy fear. She smiled and sat back down. "Now, who wants to order dessert?" The final act of Viv's revenge played out 2 weeks later at the annual Chicago Charity Coalition dinner, the social event of the season for the city's nonprofit world. It was held at the Palmer House, in a ballroom that had hosted presidents and celebrities, and attendance was mandatory for anyone who wanted to be taken seriously in Chicago philanthropy. Tessa shouldn't have been there. Her membership in the coalition had been suspended pending the outcome of her criminal case. But she showed up anyway, apparently believing she could somehow rehabilitate her reputation through sheer force of will. "She's got balls, I'll give her that," Pete observed as we watched Tessa work the cocktail reception. She was wearing a new dress, probably her last expensive purchase before her assets were frozen, and trying to act like nothing had happened. "She's delusional," Viv corrected. She looked stunning in a deep blue gown that made her eyes look like sapphires. "But that works in our favor." The three of us were standing near the bar, watching Tessa attempt to network with people who were actively avoiding her. It was painful to watch, like seeing someone try to pet a tiger that was clearly about to bite. "What's the plan?" I asked Viv. "No plan, just patience. Tessa's going to hang herself. I'm just providing the rope." She was right. As the evening progressed, Tessa became increasingly desperate in her attempts to control the narrative. She cornered board members from various foundations, trying to explain her side of the story. She approached former friends with bright smiles and casual conversation, pretending everything was normal. The breaking point came during the dinner program. The coalition's president, a formidable woman named Catherine Morrison, was giving the annual address about the importance of trust and integrity in charitable work. "The nonprofit sector depends on public confidence," Morrison said from the podium. "When that trust is broken, it affects every organization, every cause, every child we're trying to help." It was clearly a reference to the Children's Hope Foundation scandal, and everyone in the room knew it. Heads turned toward Tessa's table, where she sat alone. Her dinner companions had found excuses to move elsewhere during cocktails. That's when Tessa snapped. She stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor, and strode to the podium. The ballroom hushed as she seized the microphone from a stunned Catherine Morrison. "I deserve to defend myself," Tessa declared. "The charges are false. I was manipulated by a con man. I never stole from children. This persecution stems from jealousy, orchestrated by my own sister." Murmurs spread. Phones emerged. Then Viv rose, gliding predator-like to the stage. "May I?" she asked calmly. Tessa clung to the mic. "No." "Yes, you are," Viv countered. Security flanked Tessa. Viv addressed the crowd. "I apologize for the disruption. My sister faces trial for defrauding the Children's Hope Foundation. The evidence is overwhelming. As for jealousy, stealing from charity isn't enviable." Scattered applause erupted. Tessa, humiliated, was escorted out. Passing our table, she whispered to me, "I loved you." "No," I replied. "You loved what I represented." Viv resumed her seat, unfazed. "Remind me never to cross you," I said. She smiled. "You're on my side now." 6 months later, Tessa and Greg were imprisoned. Viv and I married, honeymooned in Italy, and built a new life in our Lincoln Park home, free from betrayal, full of possibility. Viv's revenge was complete, and I was the luckiest man alive.